Passes for Nazi goes around the outside, it's in his team.
Qualified.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Barely Qualified, a Formula One podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Channing Apodaca. Across the screen, as always, co-host Brandon Wood. How you feeling, big fella?
Yo, feeling great, man.
Yeah?
This season is just turning out to be one for the ages, one for the books.
It really is. I was thinking about this yesterday. I think this is going to be one of the best seasons in the history of Formula One, or at least in like the modern era, at least in, this era of the cars, especially with in the V6 turbo hybrid era. I think this will be one of the better seasons that we've seen, and it's crazy coming off the back of like what some people would argue as like one of the worst or most boring seasons, even though it had its own little points of interest with Max's dominance, the near perfect season, yada yada. But this year is just it's the gift that keeps on giving. We're getting so much good shit out of it. Today we're breaking down the Belgian Grand Prix, which is about a week out. Took a little bit of a break, couple days off for the two of us, and then we're gonna do some news and notes. We have some signings, some departures, but Belgian Grand Prix, number one on the docket. So, a lot of drama here. A lot of big-time drama. This is a race. The Spa de Francorchamps track usually produces excellent on-track racing. This wasn't like bad by any stretch, but I think a lot of the dramatics came from off-track shit or radio calls, not necessarily wheel-to-wheel racing, but extracurriculars in a way.
Yeah, team dynamics.
There you go. That's how we put it.
Yeah, because one of the big things for me, coming into today, last week we had so much to talk about in a controversial 1-2 finish for a team that wasn't Red Bull, right? And so now here again, we get to talk about the same thing, controversial 1-2 finish, but for a different team.
Yep. Beautiful.
So Mercedes, of course, taking the 1-2 finish here in Belgium, but not without a little bit of problems. Started out through the weekend looking not as hot for the Red Bulls. Also, McLaren a little bit on the back foot. Lando has said throughout the weekend he just was not quite feeling it.
Yeah, he for whatever reason just was not like in the groove all weekend, all throughout practices. He qualified 5th, and then in the race was kind of just doing Lando shit, not great off the line.
A bit disappointing to see him again, like you said, losing places off the start. I think he got into 4th with his qualifying, and then within the first couple turns, he had lost 3 places.
Yeah,
right?
he ran wide
at the same time,
dipped his tire into the grass, overtaken on the first 3 turns. That's the most Lando Norris shit of all time. Put your wheel in the grass on the first turn.
Yeah, it was tough too, because he had a little bit of room, but I think he just didn't quite have, the right heat in his tires, or just couldn't get the car turned around quick enough. So yeah, like I said, just ended up a little bit in the gravel and lost a bunch of momentum. And again, we see Lando losing places on the start. And so, I think going to the summer break and moving forward, obviously this is something he's focusing on. So hopefully they can turn it around a little bit. For his teammate Oscar, I think one thing that I was super impressed with in Belgium, and I guess really in the last 2 races, is one thing that he's historically been a little bit on the back foot with compared to Lando, is just his race pace, right? And being able to maintain a nice proper tire degradation that's going to help him last through the race. So, and he's been able to make good improvements on that over the and he's been able to turn around and got his win last weekend, and then here in Belgium he puts himself in great position. Could have taken the win, maybe, if not for
potentially he was
incident he had in the pit there.
Yeah, he was 0.173 seconds behind the eventual race winner. So could have potentially won this thing. One thing, like talking about Oscar, one thing that I think the the first thing that comes to mind when I think of him and his form lately is just consistency. He reminds me a lot of Valtteri Bottas, of a Carlos Sainz, where like maybe he's not like the top dog all the time, but he's solidified his position in that like top 3, top 4 consistently. You know what I mean? Like you don't really see him falter.
Yeah.
He might not be putting up the best time on the charts, but he's consistently right there. And then within that window of opportunity, every race for the past 5 or 6 races to contend for it. So looking really good, and especially at his young age to be doing that at 21 years old, or is he 21 or 23?
I think he's 20. I don't know. I don't know for sure, but
I think he's 23. But still, that's a young age to be, being compared to some of these guys with X amount of race wins, yada yada, resumes. Carlos Sainz obviously not as many races or race wins as Bottas, but also hasn't been in that competitive of a car. But sentiment remains. Oscar's looking great. Should we just jump right into the dramatics of this?
Yeah.
So break it down.
Yeah, so we had Lewis Hamilton with an excellent performance in qualifying. Let's see, he qualified
P4.
Say that again?
I think it was P4 he qualified.
P4?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Russell was what? Like, I think he didn't even make it into what?
Russell qualified
where did
P7.
Russell
So qualifying was
P7.
Verstappen, Leclerc, Perez, Hamilton, Norris, Piastri, Russell. And that's kind of all that really matters here is those top 7.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, with Max having his grid penalty, he Lewis started on the grid from 3rd, was able to make move early on was it Piastri?
Checo.
Yeah, Checo starting from 2nd. Rough weekend altogether, man. I mean, he really needed to make it happen, but
yeah, he gets a front row grid start, and I mean, I guess we'll just get this out of the way real quick. Checo finishes 7th.
Yeah, not a good weekend for Checo, but Lewis just starts off the race, takes the place from Checo, has a nice little run after I think it was like 7-8 laps, was able to take the lead from Charles, and then leading the race for a good stint there. Gets pulled in about lap 12 to go for his medium tires, or for the hards. But George Russell, being in his position a little further back, opts to go for early pit stop for hard tires, and so he can undercut. I think it was Sainz or one of the Ferraris, and ends up grabbing himself a little bit of clean air. A little bit further into that stint, he's having this conversation with the team, saying, "Hey, I'm feeling really good on these tires. This clean air is doing really good. Let's think about the one stop."
Yeah. And this was an early.
Everyone else,
Belgium is what, 50 laps, 51.
This was 44.
44. Oh, that's short.
Yeah. So. Well, so it's a little bit longer lap time than some of the other.
So that's a long stint to go on those tires, and he made them last.
Yeah, so 30 laps, so a huge portion of the race on just the one tire. So here with the circumstances, the clean air was a huge factor in allowing George to make those tires last, right? So just the timing that he worked it out gave him that advantage. Lewis, following the team's kind of original strategy, ends up going with the 2-stop, and then towards the later stages of the races, as he's catching up to George has just a little bit of life left on those tires and is able to maintain that lead through the last like 10-15 laps, I think it was. Oscar Piastri was closing in mighty quick in his McLaren. I think we had the top 3 as they finished. I think it was all within a second of each other.
No, Leclerc.
Super tight.
Oh, those 3, yeah, including George. Sorry.
Yeah, including George. So it was real tight there at the end. Lewis just not able to get around his teammates, and then they get through. cool down room and podium. Obviously, Lewis is very upset about this whole thing, and
Yeah.
he says immediately after the race, he says, I had life on my tires, and the team told me to come in, and
Yeah, why
Oscar
wasn't
makes
I
a
given
comment.
that option, basically?
Yeah, yeah. He said basically like I drove the strategy that I worked out with my team, and
Mhm.
that's
What
apparently I
what
had to
was
do
it that
something
Oscar
different.
said,
So
though?
Oscar was just like asking him, he's like, or he just makes a comment about how, oh, I guess it was really the one stop today that would have made it happen. And Lewis just says, I could have made that happen. I could have done the same thing, basically expressing some frustration
Yeah,
that
back-to-back
the
weeks that
team.
Lewis got into it with a McLaren driver in the cool-down room,
Yeah, well, I mean,
exchanging a
we
little
didn't
bit of
really get
sandpaper.
into it
No, but,
per se, but you could tell.
yeah,
Yeah, it was just funny seeing, Oscar try to play it cool when you could see that Lewis is obviously very frustrated about the situation. And then, after I think maybe within an hour or two with the podium ceremony, word is out that George Russell is disqualified from the Grand Prix because his car is underweight.
yep, by what was it, 1.2 kilos, 1.5 kilos?
One and a half. So, somewhere a little bit over like 3 pounds. So some say it's like, well, he pulled out the one stop. He did a long time on the set of hard tires, so he probably took off a lot of rubber, which he did.
Mhm.
You can see them, the pictures, and he obviously took off a lot of rubber. But he wasn't the only one that went with the one stop. There was a few other drivers, one being Fernando Alonso, and they all had their cars weighed and were all within the weight limit. So um, big opportunity missed by the team here. I guess it's just an honest mistake. I guess they're cutting margins pretty thin, right? And they're trying to take into a lot of things into account. But I guess the George going that distance on those tires and them having the amount of rubber loss was not into their cards.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because he made that call on his own. So, like, Lewis is upset about this entire thing because the team told him to come in. And I think had George not told him, like, I'm doing great on these tires, leave me out, they probably would have called him in for a second stop as well. So, this is a tricky one because, yes, I can understand Lewis being upset, but you also have to give kudos to George. And that's something that, we don't like doing on this show, but you have to do it when it's due. And he made a great call. He put himself literally exactly in the window to be competitive with the top three and moved himself up 6 places. So unfortunate that he weighs in underweight because he made a great personal strategy call. And in F1, you're out driving for yourself as much as you are, if not more than for the team. So it sucks for Lewis, but it's also a great, great personal move for George. And I can't hate on him for it,
Yeah, it's kind of a weird situation, right? Because the reason they let George do this is because he was already in a compromised position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Had he running in second or third, they probably wouldn't have done it. But because he's sitting back in seventh or whatever it was, sixth or seventh, they said, sure, let's roll the dice a little bit. And then I don't think they planned on it actually working as well as it did,
I don't think they saw him actually finishing in P1. They were maybe aiming for a podium place, maybe trying to undercut Leclerc at best, but he handled it so well. And he cruised around that track, just really monitoring those tires that his window just opened up like a motherfucker.
Yeah, and then it's been said that that 1.5 kilos or whatever could have easily made the difference between Lewis passing him or not, right? Like that
I
would
guess I
play
don't.
a big factor at that point of the race.
I
So
think Team LH on Twitter is the ones arguing that. I don't know how many scientists or aerodynamicists are the ones backing that. I've even heard like on some other shows, some of like the more bigger tech heads saying like it really wouldn't have done too much, even though yes, in F1 every ounce, every this, every that is accounted for. I don't know how much of a difference that would have made, but you could argue that, especially if you're like a Twitter account that has a blank avatar that just says hashtag Team LH44.
Well, I mean,
Go ahead and argue
it
that all
does
day.
have a difference, right? Because that's why they have the weight limit.
Sure.
That's why they have, you know what I mean? So
to what extent the difference would have been, I don't know. I won't speak on it. I have no idea.
yeah.
But
I I personally believe it because the margins were so thin that could have been, obviously George did a great job. He was managing the tires so that he was able to get great traction in the areas that he really needed to, right? Like that run going into Eau Rouge, like he was able to keep a nice little gap ahead of Lewis so that he wasn't able to close in and make it happen. So good on George for pulling it out.
Yeah, it was wild. And then, one of these things before we wrap this up that we should talk about too is this track specific layout. There's no cooldown lap at Spa. They don't do like an entire, run of the track. They kind of pull into Parc Fermé, which I never really noticed. They pull into Parc Fermé after crossing the start finish line. They go straight from their race finishing lap into, wherever.
The backside of the pits.
Exactly. Yeah. So he had no opportunity to pick up loose rubber, which in that situation at any other track, he would have done. He would have cruised on the cool side of the track with extremely hot tires and picked up as much as he would have wanted, as much as the heat in those tires would have allowed.
It could have been enough to, it could have been enough to make up for it.
Could have been just enough to weigh him in above, but because he wasn't able to get that cooldown lap in, he goes in with, bald tires. And strange. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's the second car this year. Or was it last? When was it that they got a DQ for the plank wear?
That was Coda. That was at Coda last year. There was
end
two.
of last year.
Yeah,
end of last year. So something to think about. But
yeah, a lot of DQs in the last few years.
Yeah, but on the inverse, Lewis Hamilton picks up his second win.
He wins his race
within the last month, and it's technically it's like the third win for Mercedes in this since I don't know, the past like 10 races. So things are looking good.
Yeah,
it's looking tight. We got McLaren taking it one weekend. We got Mercedes going 1-2 the next weekend. So
yeah, we've got 3 Mercedes wins, 2 McLaren wins, a couple Red Bull wins. Ferrari won Monaco. It's been insane. And then we have 7 different race winners amongst those 4 teams. Wild and wide open, and we still have, just under half the season left. So, yeah, to finish your thought, it's looking fucking good.
Yeah. Should we talk about props and flops now?
Yeah, let's do props and flops for this race. And to recap it is officially Lewis Hamilton from Oscar Piastri, and Charles Leclerc finds himself on the podium after having not the greatest run of form. I think that was a big one for Chuck Leclerc. And then I think we do need to retouch on Sergio Perez just having an absolute fucking skunk of a weekend. Like I said before, he starts on the front row, finishes literally swapping places with George Russell, the guy who won the race and then lost it. But this needed to be a big win or a big weekend for Sergio Perez. I think he needed to get on the podium. They announced post-race that Sergio Perez will be on the team at the tracks where he is sort of celebrated. So they're kind of talking about Mexico, Azerbaijan, and Singapore. 1 being his home race where they make a lot of money. 2 being street tracks where he's done traditionally pretty well in the past. But they also did, some testing at Silverstone with 2 other drivers, but they said it was just a media day. What? Let's before we get into Sergio Perez, let's do props and flops, because I think we're going to end up running long on this. So we're going to pause our conversation there, and then we'll do props and flops.
Okay, yeah, my props. I have to give it to Lewis. Just compared to everybody else, I want to give it to George, but because it's DQ, I don't feel like it's worthy.
No,
Lewis just. He drove such a good race. He played the team strategy, did everything he was supposed to.
Yeah,
and he was in the opportunity to take that the win after George is disqualified. So
yep,
Lewis racking up another win, keeping it rolling. I think his podium streak is I don't know where it's at now, but he's keeping it rolling, and he's just doing everything he should be doing. So good on you, Lewis.
He drove a great race. that would be my go-to prop, but since you already did it, I will say, as I mentioned before, Oscar Piastri, big prop to him, just on his consistency, his current run of form, looking great. Outperformed his teammate all weekend, which has not been easy for him. And then a secondary prop, I got to give it to Daniel Ricciardo. He sneaks a point in for the Visa Cash App RB team after George Russell's disqualification. So big and good showing for Daniel Ricciardo with what we're about to talk about.
I just thought of a good prop. Props to the McLaren Jackman.
Oh my God! Yes,
Oscar Piastri's overshoot, and he straight launched into the air and like just landed on his feet, like totally unfazed, just held it together and like got the car off the jag right on time, and it was just amazing.
He got lifted up into the air.
Raise.
He did get a raise. I don't know if I told you that. He got a raise and a promotion, I believe, after that. They said following the race, he got promoted to like I forget which position, but they moved him up. I don't know if it was like already in the cards that it was going to happen and that just so happened to be, or even if it was a joke when they were saying it, but he got lifted up like 1.5 feet, but you could just feel the force that he took in that. That's a great prop. Now for your flop, who do you got?
You go first.
No, I want you to go first because I don't want to take the obvious one.
I got to go with the obvious one. That's looking up and down at the grid, like the results. I mean, Checo.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
I didn't want to steal it because I have one in the chamber. So
I think we just,
we've already talked about it, but yeah,
I think we just have to go. We just have to go all the way in. Checo, my man, we love you so much.
What's going on?
What's going on, my man? I know. This weekend was tough for them. They, it's the past run of races has been tough for Red Bull, but
yeah, they brought up a new aero package that didn't really seem to work, but they also only put it on Max's car. So I had heard too that they might be going back to like an RB20 spec for Checo where he feels more comfortable to last year's spec.
Well, he needs something, right? Because as the car has developed and it's
for better or worse, like he's just not in tune with it.
It's gotten worse for him, right? Like he hasn't been able to, really put it together throughout the entire weekend. He'll have flashes of, a good drive on the race, but maybe he doesn't have a good qualifying session in reverse, right? So this weekend with the P2 starting position on the grid, like you got to at least convert a top 5 out of that, and it could have been,
he was behind his teammate within a few turns.
Yeah, it's rough.
Or like a few laps, I'm sorry. And his teammate started Max started P11?
Yeah.
And it wasn't very long until he was behind him. So and this is a very important race that he needed to show up and show out to, and he just didn't. So very obvious flop.
Helmet was very comfortable in saying after the race that Checo fell apart in the second stint, and that's really where everything fell apart. And
if ever you need an honest comment, see Dr. Helmet Marco, because he's going to give it to you. So before we continue talking about Checo and what's to come for him, my flop is going to go to Haas as a whole, finishing P14 and P18 after having a really solid run of form lately and, converting a lot of races into points. They were nowhere this weekend. I was expecting a little bit more out of them and just showing their inconsistency. Not necessarily saying that they're going to be on the back foot from here on out, but just having a one-off bad race, hopefully, because I do want to see Haas continue to make waves in this season. But big flop from then. But
yeah, they've been
Oh, go ahead.
They've been able. I was just gonna say they've been able to get nab lots of points.
Yeah,
past
they've looked great.
Run of races,
except here they were nowhere. So, continuing what we're talking about with the downfall of Sergio Perez, after this race, it was announced that Red Bull Racing was doing not a test drive per se, at least is what they're saying. They're calling it a media day where they put Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, and Liam Lawson all in the current spec of the Red Bull car, which they do not drive. Liam Lawson, however, is the test driver, so he's got more sim time. And what the results wielded, I don't think anybody knows, but it's a big show. Christian Horner can sandbag it and say that, it's just a media day and it has nothing to do with the state of their current drivers, all they want, or one of their current drivers, yada, yada. But it's pretty obvious what's going on. They're seeing how these three guys are going to fare in that car. I don't see why they would need media coverage of three guys who aren't on Red Bull Racing's roster in that car. So that's funny little cover up.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that they're doing a driver assessment, right?
Yeah.
They want to see who's in the best position to possibly take over Sergio's roles if they do decide to make that decision, right? The team was to have a meeting the Monday after Belgium Grand Prix to discuss Sergio's future. And the result of that discussion was Horner going down to the factory and telling everybody that, yes, Checo is going to be here for the foreseeable future. When we come back from summer break, he's going to be in the car. So you guys don't have to worry about anything. And that was it, right?
Yeah.
So there wasn't like an official statement or anything. It was just an announcement to the rest of the team members at the factory, right? So by a lot of people, this is kind of seen as just maybe them kicking the can down the road a little bit, not fully making a decision. There's word going out that the team was asked by Formula One management or Liberty Media to keep Checo on the team because he's such a popular driver on the grid. And they were a little worried about how ticket sales may be affected at especially the Mexico Grand Prix, where he is such a huge star. So whether there's any, whether this is actually like a real thing that's been discussed with them or even a consideration from Red Bull, that's like a possible play. I'm not sure, but
there's been a lot of talks too about, whether Red Bull is keeping him on for merch sales and sponsorship deals, because he brings in a lot of money through Mexican sponsorships and then the merch sales in regions of the world where he's popular, i.e. North America, United States, and Mexico. And whether or not the championship points that he's going to bring is comparable to the number of merch sales that he's going to bring to the team.
Yeah, well,
so I've heard people saying that a lot of this decision is relying on Red Bull's accounting department.
Yeah, and you have to think about it like just being a member of that team as like a factory worker or one of the engineers or something like that, like where you have a bonus that's based upon where you got your team finishes in the manufacturer standings, right? So you're looking at the team and they're having trouble getting rid of a driver who's not delivering. How is that going to make you feel about like what the actual team you're working for is priorities, right?
And we're seeing
shortly
that.
after. We're seeing that shortly after. A couple days. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday of this week. We got word that Jonathan Wheatley, who's the sporting director at Red Bull, is going to be leaving to take up team principal role at Audi, the new team going into effect in 2026. So, this is seen as another devastating loss for Red Bull. Earlier in the year, we got word that Adrian Newey, their technical chief, was leaving. And then Jonathan Wheatley is also seen as another key figure that's on his way out now.
How much of this, we don't know if this is part of like the mass exodus from Red Bull having to do with A, their driver situation, B, their current team principals, off track, away from the racing side of things, drama and controversy, or if this is guys just taking opportunity elsewhere when it's given to them. Because a team principal role at a new team, an upstart team that could potentially wield really great results in its first few years, like Audi, taking that role is a much better job than the sporting director at Red Bull Racing for your resume, for your career, and what you probably want to do, So who knows if it's just like, oh, I'm leaving to get away from this team, or I'm just taking a better opportunity. It just, the
Yeah, it's hard
timing
to
of it is very fishy.
Yeah, it's hard to say what Newey and Wheatley are thinking exactly.
Yeah.
Like, right. But, it's obvious that there's been a lot of turmoil going on over there, and there's a good reason for people to not want to be around that, right? So they want to be somewhere where they can just focus on their work, and they feel like everything's the focus is in the right place, and there's not a bunch of noise distracting people from the task at hand, right? Which is winning championships, right? So it's just some, just see if this continues to be the further downfall of the team. Seeing it could be opportunity for other people within the Red Bull organization to move up and maybe move things in the right direction.
Yeah.
So interested to see where this goes.
It's going to be wild. And then other big news, Carlos Sainz has officially found his home for the foreseeable future. A lot of people thinking he was going to go to Audi, maybe fill in that Mercedes seat, but no, he has signed with Williams Racing. Big surprise, I think. His name was being thrown in that hat for a while, but it wasn't. It just seemed like most F1 fans were like, he deserves better, But he ultimately signed a long-term contract because it's through 2026 and beyond.
I mean, this had to be a tough decision for Carlos, right?
Mhm.
He was kind of waiting out for a little bit to see what was going to happen with the Red Bull seat. There's an open Mercedes seat available. And there was rumors going around that he got a pretty good offer for the Mercedes seat, but it was a 1-year deal. There's no long-term guarantee. The Audi situation, obviously Audi doesn't fully take over the team until 2026. So there's a couple interim years where the team's not really looking that great. Sauber's having issues. Beginning of the season was pretty atrocious for them. So a team like Williams comes along, we're very much in a building year this year. I mean, the beginning of this year was pretty rough, right? I remember we were talking about how there had tons of backups at their factory. They had one race where they couldn't even have
Two
both
cars.
drivers out there because Alex had crashed his car it was a practice session, and Logan's was the only one that had a chassis that was able to go out. So
So they made it Alex's.
So a few months ago, we talked thinking Williams being in play probably wouldn't have been something that we were thinking of. But as the seasons progressed, I mean, last year they had already made some leaps and bounds under new management. They got James Vowles, team principal, in there, trying to turn things around. And then with his regrouping of the factory this year and those problems that they had earlier, hopefully they're able to work through a lot of that this year, get some of the kinks worked out, get the car in a really good place to go into next year. They're going to have an amazing lineup with Alex Albon, who's been so consistent and just delivering for the team since he came in. And then Carlos, who's multi-time race winner, shows excellent, racecraft. He's been part of a lot of, great works programs. Has his time at Ferrari, his time at McLaren, his time at Red Bull. So he's got a lot of experience he brings to the table. I mean, this is just going to be such a solid team pairing for Williams going into 2025. I'm so excited.
Yeah, Carlos says, when he makes his debut with Williams next year, he'll have driven for half of the grid. Officially, if you include Alpine being the Renault team. It's a very interesting one because for the past few years, we've been talking about Williams getting their head out of their own ass, getting out of their own way, and actually improving. But you see it in snippets, and then they sort of tend to fall back. So hopefully they can get themselves in a more competitive window, more towards the middle of the pack on a consistent level, because they're going to have what I view as one of the better pairings in F1, which, I've said at the beginning of the season, it's all about the pairing now. After this season, like, you can't do it as a solo act. I just don't think anymore. And in terms of pairings, like, you could say that, with the offset, like, they're comparable to Red Bull's pairing if they go with Sergio Perez. Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Alex Albon, Carlos Sainz, like, they kind of even that, whole thing out.
Yeah.
But,
totally.
With Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, you've got Kimi Antonelli, probably George Russell, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri. Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz is a solid pairing. They might be the best pair in the worst car, depending on how Williams' car looks next year, you know? I don't hate the move for Carlos just so long as Williams can put something on track that is more consistent, because I think they can do a lot of good work together, those two drivers.
Yeah, I'm going to be really interested how they're able to develop the car, right? Because this year they've made some improvements, but it's also they've had some steps back at the same time. There's been a couple upgrades they've brought that haven't really worked, and they've kind of just been spinning their wheels a little bit. So I want to see some, improvements. Not to say that I want to see them move to the front of the pack like a la McLaren or Stroll. Not Stroll, but I'm thinking Lawrence Stroll, but I want to say Aston Martin did in 22.
Yeah.
Or 23, but
But who knows if they could? Like, if they did, I wouldn't be like so shocked, because we saw a team already do that. It feels like anything is up in the air. Like, anything can happen. I doubt it will, but you do want to see improvements with them, because now for the first time in forever, they've got a two-driver team. They haven't had two consistent drivers, since Valtteri Bottas and Lance Stroll, or Lance Stroll and Sergei Sirotkin, and that's calling Lance Stroll a consistent driver. He did podium in that car, but you know what I mean? It's been years since they've had a two-driver team, and now they finally do.
Maldonado.
They spent years with Nicholas Latifi. Now they've spent a few years with Logan Sargent, and now their one driver is going to have a 1B alongside, and who knows which one is which, but finally a little bit of actual real upside to take the workload off the factory for that team. So
yeah,
exciting news.
And and it's thinking about it now, it's like it's probably a good sign that they were able to put together the budget to be able to pay Carlos, right? To be able to hire him, right? And they were able to make the deal sweet enough that he wants to go there. And he's not an idiot, he's able to read between the lines, and he really believes in the team, and he sees the work that they're putting in right now, and he sees there's an opportunity there in the future to really build something special. So I think it's gonna be cool, man. It's gonna be exciting. So
yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be definitely fun to see him. Also shows that maybe the Audi team doesn't have a package that's going to be competitive in a window that Carlos Sainz wants. Because, he was kind of like the big fish that I felt like they were going after, and they didn't land him. So maybe they don't have the offerings that we might think in their first few years.
Yeah, and just like with the whole Audi thing, it seems like it was announced 2 years ago, something like that, 3 years ago, that this was happening, but we haven't really seen a whole lot of motion with the actual team being put together until more recently, right? They had Andreas Seidel that was going to be the team principal. He was former McLaren, a guy that was brought in for earlier on in the project, and then more recently, he was. It was said that he was going to be removed and replaced by Mattia Bonato, actually. So things getting shooken up over there. Maybe Carlos, maybe that was brought in. Mattia was brought in to try to sweeten the deal for Carlos, but Carlos maybe looking at that as a little bit too much up and down happening. Things are not as set in stone. There's maybe not a secure vision for what they're doing. So
exactly.
And whereas you look at James Vowles and Williams, and they're already on track, right? They're already started the process. Things are already in place. So
there's something about James Vowles and his leadership qualities that even if things aren't going well at Williams, and for all intents and purposes, we have no real reason to believe that things are going well, from a spectator point of view at Williams. Yeah. But I would follow that man into the ocean for some reason. He's so staunch and so charismatic, and just has that leadership quality that you're like, okay, I'll do whatever you say, sir.
Yeah, he gives a very honest demeanor.
Yeah.
But we shall see. I think it's gonna be cool. They can very well be in the place that Haas was beginning this year, right? Where it was like they came in maybe not totally like very under the radar, like saying we're going to be nowhere, but they focused on like one part of the development, right? Like Haas focused on extending the tire life in the races, and it worked for them, right? Like they didn't try to do a bunch of crazy huge upgrades. They did small incremental changes to just help refine the car, and it worked for them. So
Yep.
where they were in Belgium, I'm not sure, but regardless, for much of the season, it's worked for them. So I think there's opportunity there.
Absolutely. Anything else we got to go over?
I think that's it for now. Maybe do another little update here in a week or two before we hop back into the season.
Yeah, we're in the throes of the summer break, so we got a solid month or so off before we hit the Netherlands. And I think the season's going to really open up. I think it's going to open wide up as soon as we hit Zandvoort.
Yeah, I mean, Constructors Championship, that's still up in the air. Drivers Championship, I think it's going to be really tough for anybody. I guess really right now it's Lando is our only hope at taking the fight.
78 points off, yeah. And you know what?
It's going to be real tough. I don't know.
If things really go south for Max Verstappen and Red Bull Racing, Chuck Leclerc's in that window too. He's 22 points off. So if like a dramatic downshift happens that puts Lando in that window, you might as well put Chuck in there too. So
it's anybody's game. It's one DNF, is enough to fill that gap. So
not exactly, but
well,
close.
for I'm talking about between Charles and Lando.
Oh yeah, for those two, points. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So.
But I do think McLaren's going to sew up the Constructors Championship. They're less than 50 points or just over 50 points. No, just under 50 points away. And with one driver hardly securing points on any given weekend, that's gonna get wrapped up real quick, I believe. So very exciting stuff happening. And then again, Ferrari just 20 points behind them. Wowza, we've got a doozy of the second stint of this season coming up. I'm excited, Brandon. I know you're excited, guys. This has been Barely Qualified, a Formula One podcast, the post-Belgian Grand Prix edition. We'll see you back here in a few weeks. Peace.
Peace.